To the outside world, they were models of Victorian virtue, dutiful wives who poured tea at 4 o'clock, embroidered in sunlit parlors, and never spoke above a whisper in mixed company. But behind the velvet curtains and locked bedroom doors, these women were leading lives their husbands could never imagine. Secret apartments rented under false names, love letters hidden in hat boxes, children born to men who weren't their spouses. For a time, they managed the impossible, existing in two worlds at once. But in the 1880s and 90s, when tabloid newspapers turned scandal into profit and blackmailers turned secrets into currency, every hidden life had an expiration date. And the fall, when it came, was always public. But Chapter 1: The Architecture of a Perfect Lie. Mary Adelaide Blount learned to deceive her husband before she ever learned to love him, and the education would cost her everything. She was 23 years old in 1886 when she signed the lease for apartment 4C at 217 Fifth Avenue. The name on the lease wasn't hers. She called herself Mrs. Catherine Webb, a widow visiting from Boston. The landlord never questioned it. Why would he? She arrived in a private carriage, paid 6 months in advance, and spoke with the cultivated diction of someone who had never worried about rent. The apartment was modest by her standards. 3 rooms on the 4th floor, walls papered in cream silk, a view of the avenue that captured afternoon light. She furnished it herself over 3 careful weeks, in selecting pieces that would never appear in the inventory of her actual home. A rosewood writing desk, a settee upholstered in green velvet, curtains she could draw against the world. This was her fortress, her other life. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Mary Adelaide Blount transformed. She left her mansion on 62nd Street as herself, dressed for charity work or shopping. Her driver took her to various respectable destinations: the dressmaker on Madison, the tea room at the Waldorf, the offices of the Society for Orphan Children. From there, she walked. 3 blocks, sometimes 4. Just another well-dressed woman moving through the city. At exactly 2:15, she entered the building on Fifth Avenue through the service entrance. The superintendent had been paid to forget her face. Inside apartment 4C, she became someone else entirely. Not Mrs. William Blount, wife of the railroad magnate. Not the woman who hosted 18-course dinners and sat on the board of 4 charitable foundations. Here, she was simply Mary, a woman who could read novels considered unsuitable, a woman who could remove her corset and breathe, a woman who could wait for the knock that came at 3 o'clock every Tuesday and Thursday without fail. The mechanics of deception required precision. She maintained a separate bank account, hidden under the guise of charitable donations. Every month, she withdrew $200 in cash, claiming it went to various causes: orphanages, hospitals, the Fresh Air Fund for tubercular children. Her husband, William, never questioned it. Why would he? Charity was what proper wives did with their pin money. She employed a lady's maid named Sarah, who understood the unspoken contract between them. Sarah carried the messages. Sarah kept the second wardrobe, the one Mary couldn't keep at home. Sarah lied with a straight face when William asked where his wife had spent her afternoon. The price of Sarah's loyalty was an extra $20 a month and the implicit threat of immediate dismissal without reference if she ever spoke a word. The devil lived in details. Mary kept 2 sets of calling cards. She memorized a complete second schedule. She learned to recognize the faces of people who might report seeing her where she shouldn't be. She became fluent in the language of plausible deniability, If spotted near Fifth Avenue, she was visiting the museum. If seen entering a building, she was calling on a sick friend. Every lie had a backup lie. For 2 years, the architecture held. She never wrote letters to the apartment. Nothing on paper, nothing that could be found. When she needed to change plans, Sarah delivered verbal messages. When she purchased anything for the apartment, she paid in cash and provided false names. The apartment existed in a pocket universe, separate from her real life, insulated by money and careful planning. But even the most careful architecture has a foundation, and foundations can crack. In Mary Adelaide Blount's case, the foundation was built on 3 assumptions. First, that her husband would never audit her charitable donations. Second, that servants stayed loyal as long as they were paid. Third, that a secret kept between 3 people could stay secret forever. By 1888, all 3 assumptions would prove catastrophically wrong. But in 1886, standing in her secret apartment with afternoon light streaming through windows her husband would never see, Mary Adelaide Blount believed she had solved an impossible equation. She believed she could have the security of marriage and the freedom of choice. She believed the lie could last forever. She was wrong about everything except the size of the price she would pay. Chapter 2. The wives who had everything except a choice. They married for duty, for family alliances, for their father's business deals, but never once for the dangerous luxury called love. Understanding why women like Mary Adelaide Blount built double lives requires understanding what their actual lives contained. The answer is simple and devastating. Everything except autonomy. Mary married William Blount in 1883. She was 20 years old. He was 41. The marriage was arranged by her father, who owned textile mills in Massachusetts, and William, who needed social legitimacy to match his railroad fortune. They met 3 times before the wedding. During those meetings, they discussed the weather, the theater season, and the appropriate number of courses for a formal dinner. They did not discuss love. Love was not part of the transaction. The wedding cost $32,000. 600 guests attended. The New York Times devoted 4 column inches to describing Mary's dress. White satin overlaid with Brussels lace, a train extending 14 feet, orange blossoms imported from Florida. She was beautiful, obedient, and utterly irrelevant to her own future. The marriage contract was explicit in ways the wedding vows were not. Mary received an annual allowance of $1,200 for clothing and personal expenses. In exchange, she managed the household staff of 11 servants, hosted social functions that advanced William's business interests, produced children to inherit his fortune, and refrained from embarrassing him publicly. She owned nothing. Her allowance could be revoked at his discretion. If she left him, she left with nothing, not even the children she might bear. This was not unusual. This was the law. In 1886, married women in New York had no legal right to their own earnings. They could not sign contracts, control property, or make wills without their husband's permission. Divorce required proof of adultery, abandonment, or extreme cruelty. And even then, judges routinely granted custody of children to fathers, regardless of circumstance. A woman who left her marriage left as chattel that had wandered from its owner. So they stayed. And staying meant negotiating a particular kind of imprisonment. The mansion on 62nd Street had 42 rooms. Mary's domain included the morning room, the conservatory, the parlor, and the bedrooms. William's domain was everywhere else: the library, the study, the billiard room, the smoking room. They maintained separate bedrooms. William visited hers twice a week, on Tuesdays and Saturdays, encounters that lasted approximately 15 minutes and were conducted in near total darkness. He did not ask if she enjoyed them. Her enjoyment was not relevant. She gave birth to 2 children in 4 years, a son in 1884, and a daughter in 1886. She nursed neither. Wet nurses were hired. Nannies raised them. Mary saw her children for 1 hour each afternoon, a visiting period during which she was expected to be affectionate, but not disruptive to their routine. Motherhood had been outsourced to staff. Her days followed an unvarying pattern. She woke at 7. She breakfasted alone. She reviewed household accounts with the housekeeper. She answered correspondence. She paid social calls or received them. She changed clothes 4 times. Morning dress, afternoon dress, tea gown, evening gown. She dined with William when he was home, which was 3 nights a week. They discussed his business associates, upcoming social events, and household matters. They did not discuss books, ideas, or feelings. Those were not appropriate dinner topics. This was the life she had everything in: silk dresses and Persian carpets, servants and security, a name that meant something in society, and underneath it all, a creeping suffocation that made her want to scream in the middle of charity luncheons. She was not alone. Across New York, across America, thousands of women lived in gilded cages identical to hers. Most of them endured it. They found small rebellions, novels read in secret, friendships that sustained them, charity work that gave them purpose. They made peace with powerlessness. But some women wanted more than endurance. Some women wanted to choose something, anything, for themselves. And in the 1880s, when society offered no legal path to autonomy, they built illegal ones. The double life wasn't rebellion, it was survival. It was the only way to claim a piece of existence that belonged to them and not to the contract their fathers had signed. If you could not divorce, you disappeared into an afternoon. If you could not own property, you rented it under a false name. If you could not be yourself in your own home, you became someone else, somewhere else. The tragedy wasn't that they lied. The tragedy was that lying was the only honest thing they could do. Chapter 3. When audacity looked like freedom. For exactly 2 years and 7 months, Mary Adelaide Blount convinced herself she could have both lives forever, the lie and the truth. The knock came at 3 o'clock. It always came at 3 o'clock. Mary opened the door to apartment 4C, and there was Arthur Dennison with paint still under his fingernails and that smile that made her forget she was supposed to be someone else, somewhere else. He was 28 years old, penniless, charming, and everything her husband was not. He painted portraits that almost sold. He read poetry aloud. He touched her face like she was real. They met in 1887 at an exhibition of American painters at the National Academy. She was there with a group of society women performing interest in art as part of their cultural obligations. He was there because his work hung on the wall, a small portrait in an unfashionable corner. She stopped in front of it longer than she meant to. He noticed. They spoke for 7 minutes about light and composition. She gave him her card. 3 weeks later, she rented the apartment. Their relationship existed in a space outside normal time. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. 180 minutes twice a week. In those hours, Mary was not Mrs. Blount. She was not a wife, not a mother, not a hostess. She was simply a woman who wanted something and took it. They talked about everything her real life forbade. Books that questioned social convention, ideas about women's rights, labor reform, the hypocrisies of wealth. Arthur had grown up poor in Pennsylvania, the son of a coal miner who died of black lung when Arthur was 12. He understood that money was power, and that the people who had it used it to crush people who didn't. He made her see her own life differently. The mansion wasn't elegance, it was extraction. Every silk dress was bought with someone else's labor. But they also simply existed together. He painted, she read. Sometimes they didn't speak for an hour. The silence was enough. It was a silence she chose. By 1888, the double life had achieved a kind of terrible equilibrium. On Tuesday, April 3rd, Mary attended the spring charity gala at Delmonico's. She wore a gown of pale blue silk with seed pearls sewn into the bodice. She danced with her husband. She made polite conversation with Mrs. Astor and Mrs. Vanderbilt. She smiled until her face ached. On Wednesday, April 4th, she visited Arthur's studio. They made love on the narrow bed in the corner. Afterward, he read her sections of Leaves of Grass, which was considered scandalous and beautiful. She felt both. On Friday, April 6th, she hosted a dinner party for 24 guests. The menu included 8 courses. The conversation covered the opera season, potential matches for various debutantes, and whether the new hotel on 34th Street was too commercial. William sat at the head of the table. She sat at the foot. Between them stretched 12 feet of polished mahogany and a marriage that was entirely transactional. She convinced herself this could continue. The math seemed sustainable. 2 afternoons a week, 6 hours out of 168. She was careful. She was clever. The apartment was secure. Sarah was loyal. William was oblivious. What she failed to calculate was that every double life creates witnesses. The doorman at 217 Fifth Avenue who noticed the well-dressed woman arriving every Tuesday and Thursday. The carriage driver who sometimes waited outside longer than a charity visit should require. The dressmaker who wondered why Mrs. Blount ordered clothing that never appeared at social functions. The bank clerk who processed cash withdrawals that added up over time. Witnesses have value, and in 1889, someone decided to find out exactly how much Mary Adelaide Blount's secret was worth. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was waiting for her at the apartment, slipped under the door. No postmark. Hand-delivered. It contained 3 sentences. I know about Mr. Dennison. I know about Tuesdays and Thursdays. $5,000 will ensure I forget everything. The signature was a single initial, C. Mary's hands shook so badly she dropped the letter. It fell onto the cream carpet, words facing up like an accusation. In that moment, standing in the apartment that had felt like freedom, yet she understood that the double life had always been a trap. She just hadn't realized she was the one who would spring it. Chapter 4. The Blackmailer Who Collected Wives. Jonathan Creel had a simple business model. Find the women with secrets, offer them silence for a price, and watch the money arrive. He was 34 years old in 1889, and blackmail had made him richer than a decade of honest work ever could. He operated from a rented office on Park Row, above a printing shop that asked no questions about the hours he kept or the people who visited. His business card identified him as a private inquiry agent. That was technically true. He inquired. He investigated. He collected information about people who thought their secrets were safe. And then he made them pay. De Creel had learned early that the Gilded Age ran on 2 currencies, money and reputation. For the wealthy, reputation was often more valuable than money. A scandal could destroy a family name that had taken 3 generations to build. Social ostracism meant business partners who suddenly became unavailable, clubs that revoked memberships, daughters who couldn't make advantageous marriages. The rich would pay almost anything to avoid it. Women, especially, were vulnerable. A man caught with a mistress faced whispers and knowing smiles. A woman caught with a lover faced total annihilation. Creel understood this asymmetry. He weaponized it. His method was systematic. First, identify the target. Wealthy married women, preferably under 40, with controlling husbands and visible social positions. Second, establish surveillance. He employed a network of informants across Manhattan, building superintendents, carriage drivers, ladies' maids looking to supplement their income, shop clerks who noticed unusual purchases. Everyone had a price. For most, it was $10 to $20 a month. Third, gather evidence. Creel needed proof. Letters were best, but difficult to obtain. Photographs worked well, but required planning. Testimony from multiple witnesses was sufficient. Hotel registries under false names. Bank records showing unexplained expenditures. Anything that could be shown to a husband or published in a newspaper. Fourth, make the approach. Always by letter. Never face-to-face initially. State the facts clearly. Name the price. Provide payment instructions. Wait. They always paid. Mary Adelaide Blount came to Creel's attention in December of 1888. A doorman named Thomas Walsh worked at 217 Fifth Avenue. Walsh supplemented his salary by selling information to Creel about the building's tenants. He reported that a woman calling herself Mrs. Catherine Webb visited apartment 4C every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork. She arrived in an expensive carriage, but always dismissed the driver and entered through the service entrance. She stayed approximately 3 hours. A man visited the same apartment at the same time. Walsh didn't know who the woman really was, but Creel knew how to find out. He paid a carriage driver $15 to follow the woman when she left the building. The driver reported that she walked to various locations and then eventually returned to a mansion on 62nd Street. Creel consulted the social register. The mansion belonged to William Blount, the railroad magnate. Further inquiry revealed William Blount had married Mary Adelaide Cunningham in 1883. Creel now had a name. He needed a face. He attended a charity event at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where Mrs. William Blount was listed as a patroness. He studied her from across the room. The following Thursday, he positioned himself outside 217 Fifth Avenue. At 2:30, Mary Adelaide Blount entered the building through the service entrance. He had his confirmation. Next, he identified the man. This required patience. Creel hired a photographer, a young man named Michael Reeves, who worked for the illustrated newspapers. Reeves positioned himself across from the building on a Thursday afternoon with a camera concealed in a large case. At 3 o'clock, a man arrived. Reeves captured his image entering the building. Creel showed the photograph to his network. An art supply shop owner recognized Arthur Dennison, a struggling painter who bought supplies on credit. Creel located Dennison's studio on 10th Street. He bribed the building's janitor to let him into the studio when Dennison was out. Inside, he found paintings of a woman who looked remarkably like Mary Adelaide Blount. He also found letters, hidden in a desk drawer, written in a woman's hand. They were not signed, but they referenced Tuesdays and an apartment on Fifth Avenue. Creel had everything he needed. In March of 1889, he sent the first letter to the apartment. $5,000, payment to be left in an envelope at a specified location within 1 week. Mary paid. That should have been the end of it. In theory, blackmail was a one-time transaction, but Creel had learned that once someone paid, they would pay again. The secret had value as long as it remained secret. Why settle for $5,000 when he could extract $20,000 over time? 6 weeks after the first payment, he sent a second letter, another $5,000. This time, the tone was different. He reminded her that he had kept his word so far. He suggested that continued silence required continued investment. Mary paid again. By autumn of 1889, Creel was running simultaneous blackmail operations on 4 different women. Mary Adelaide Blount was merely the most lucrative. There was also Mrs. Elizabeth Hartley, who was hiding gambling debts from her husband. Mrs. Constance Morris, who had given birth to a child during a suspiciously timed European trip. Mrs. Ann Patterson, whose lover was not another man, but another woman. The infrastructure supporting Creel's operation was extensive. He kept meticulous records in a leather-bound ledger, coded so that names appeared only as initials. He maintained 6 separate bank accounts under different names to deposit the payments. He employed 3 full-time investigators and a network of at least 40 paid informants across Manhattan. His annual income from blackmail exceeded $30,000, more than most doctors or lawyers earned legitimately. He faced almost no legal risk. Blackmail was technically a crime, but it was difficult to prosecute. Victims rarely reported it, because doing so meant revealing the secret publicly. The few cases that went to trial usually ended in acquittal, because proving extortion required testimony from victims who were unwilling to testify. The system protected blackmailers almost as thoroughly as it punished their victims. Creel understood something fundamental about Gilded Age society. It was not designed to prevent scandal. It was designed to monetize it. The newspapers wanted stories to sell papers. The blackmailers wanted money to stay quiet. The lawyers wanted fees to manage the damage. Everyone profited except the women whose lives were destroyed. In January of 1890, Creel sent Mary Adelaide Blount a 4th demand. This time, the amount was $7,000. He knew she was running out of money. He knew the strain was showing. He calculated, correctly, that desperation would make her more compliant, not less. What he failed to calculate was that desperation also makes people reckless, and that sometimes, when the price of silence becomes unbearable, people stop paying for it. But that reckoning was still months away. For now, Mary counted out another payment while her husband's accountant began to notice patterns in the household finances that didn't quite add up. Chapter 5. The Other Mrs. Harrison and Her Terrible Gamble. While Mary Adelaide counted out blackmail money, Catherine Harrison was building something far more dangerous. A second family nobody knew existed. Catherine's deception made Mary's look almost simple by comparison. Mary maintained a secret lover and a hidden apartment. Catherine maintained an entire second household, complete with 2 children, in another city 90 miles away. She had started in 1885, the same year she gave birth to her first child with her husband, Robert Harrison. Robert was a steel magnate, owner of foundries in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia that employed 3,000 men. He was 50 years old when he married Catherine, who was 24. The marriage followed the familiar pattern. Her father owned shipping interests. Robert needed social connections to expand his business into new markets. They signed a contract disguised as a wedding. Catherine discovered 2 things quickly. First, she was capable of producing children. Second, She felt nothing for the man who fathered them. In 1884, before her marriage, Catherine had been engaged to a young man named Thomas Blake. Thomas was a lawyer with good prospects, but no fortune. Catherine's father forbade the marriage. There was no money in it, no advantage. She was 23 years old and had no legal power to refuse her father's decision. The engagement was broken. Thomas Blake left Philadelphia. She married Robert Harrison, but Thomas Blake did not disappear. In 1885, Catherine encountered him by chance at a charity event in Philadelphia. They spoke briefly. He was practicing law, living modestly. He had not married. Within a month, they were meeting secretly. Within 6 months, Catherine was pregnant with his child. The logistics were staggering. Catherine told her husband she was visiting her aunt in Philadelphia for health reasons. The aunt, a widow named Margaret Cunningham, agreed to cover for her in exchange for financial support. Catherine rented a small house on Spruce Street under the name Mrs. Thomas Blake. She hired a housekeeper and a nurse. In December of 1885, she gave birth to a daughter. She named the child Sarah. For the next 5 years, Catherine Harrison lived 2 complete lives with a precision that would have impressed a military strategist. She spent 3 weeks of every month in Pittsburgh with Robert, playing the role of Mrs. Robert Harrison. During those weeks, she managed a household staff of 14, hosted dinners for her husband's business associates, and raised the 2 children she had with Robert. 1 week each month, she traveled to Philadelphia. She told Robert she was caring for her ailing aunt. In Philadelphia, she became Mrs. Thomas Blake. She lived in the house on Spruce Street with Thomas, their daughter Sarah, and eventually a second child, a son named William, born in 1888. The financial complexity was extraordinary. Catherine received an allowance of $2,000 a year from Robert. She diverted half of it to maintain the Philadelphia household. She forged receipts for charitable donations to explain the missing money. She paid the housekeeper in Philadelphia double wages to ensure loyalty. She maintained 2 complete wardrobes, 2 sets of servants who believed different stories, 2 entirely separate identities. The emotional compartmentalization was perhaps even more complex. In Pittsburgh, she was the dutiful wife who attended church every Sunday and never raised her voice. In Philadelphia, she was the woman who laughed, who argued, who lived. She loved one set of children dutifully. She loved the other set desperately. She slept beside Robert Harrison with cold obligation. She slept beside Thomas Blake with something that felt like truth. For 5 years, it worked. The deception required layers of accomplices. Catherine's Aunt Margaret in Philadelphia knew everything and maintained the fiction for $200 a year. The housekeeper in Pittsburgh, a woman named Ellen Morris, suspected something, but asked no questions for an extra $30 a month. Thomas Blake's law practice provided minimal income, so Catherine supported him financially, funneling money through her aunt to avoid suspicion. The nurse who cared for Sarah and William believed Catherine was a widow whose husband had died at sea. And Catherine constructed an elaborate architecture of lies, each piece supporting the others. If questioned about her time in Philadelphia, she had medical receipts from doctors treating her fictional nervous condition. If Robert grew suspicious, Aunt Margaret would confirm the story. If the servants in Philadelphia wondered about her absences, the nurse explained that Mrs. Blake traveled for her health. But every system has vulnerabilities. Catherine's vulnerability was the children. By 1890, Sarah was 4 years old and William was 2. They were no longer infants who could be easily concealed or explained away. Sarah asked questions. She wanted to know why her mother left every 3 weeks. She asked about the man in the photographs Catherine kept hidden, the man who looked nothing like the father Sarah knew, and children get sick. In March of 1890, William contracted scarlet fever. The illness struck suddenly, viciously. Within 2 days, he was burning with fever. His breathing labored. The doctor in Philadelphia told Catherine the child might not survive. She faced an impossible choice. If she stayed in Philadelphia to nurse William, Robert would eventually question why her visit was extending so long. If she returned to Pittsburgh while her child was dying, she would lose the chance to be with him in what might be his final days. Catherine chose William. She stayed in Philadelphia for 3 weeks. She sent telegrams to Robert explaining that her aunt had taken a severe turn and required constant care. Robert, annoyed but not yet suspicious, accepted the explanation. William survived, but the extended absence had created cracks in the facade. Robert's secretary, reviewing household accounts, noticed that Catherine's charity expenditures had increased substantially over 5 years. He brought it to Robert's attention. Robert, who had never questioned his wife's spending before, asked for detailed accounting. Catherine scrambled to produce forged receipts. She created fictional charity organizations. She enlisted Aunt Margaret to write letters confirming the donations. But the accountant was thorough. He contacted several of the named charities. 3 of them did not exist. Robert Harrison was not a stupid man. He was a businessman who had built an empire by noticing when numbers didn't align. He began to ask questions. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, Thomas Blake was reaching his own breaking point. For 5 years, and he had lived as Catherine's secret. He loved her. He loved their children. But he was 32 years old, living in a house paid for by another man's wife, practicing law in obscurity, seeing his children only when Catherine could visit. He wanted more. He wanted a real life. In April of 1890, Thomas made a decision that would destroy everything. He consulted with a lawyer about his legal rights to Sarah and William. The lawyer told him something Catherine had not. Because Thomas and Catherine were not married, he had no legal claim to the children. In the eyes of the law, they were illegitimate. They belonged to no one, unless he sued for custody and proved paternity. Thomas filed the papers in May of 1890. The lawsuit demanded recognition of his paternity and requested custody of Sarah Blake and William Blake. The filing was a matter of public record. Within a week, a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer found the story. The headline appeared on May 18th. Steel magnate's wife maintains secret family in Philadelphia. Catherine's double life ended in 900 words of newspaper copy that named everyone involved, detailed the house on Spruce Street, and included quotes from neighbors who had seen the well-dressed woman visiting regularly. The story reached Pittsburgh within hours. Robert Harrison read about his wife's other children in a newspaper. He'd learned he had been deceived for 5 years while sitting in his office. The paper spread across his desk, his hands shaking with rage. The fortress Catherine had built with such precision collapsed in a single afternoon. Every lie was exposed simultaneously. There was no time to explain, no way to control the narrative. The machinery of scandal ground forward without mercy. And Catherine, standing in the house on Spruce Street with her 2 children clinging to her skirts, understood that she had gambled everything on a lie that was always going to be discovered. The only question had been when. Now she knew. Chapter 6. The moment the walls closed in. Mary's fourth blackmail payment was due on the same day her husband's accountant questioned a series of unexplained withdrawals totaling $12,000. The convergence happened on April the 23rd, 1890. Mary woke that morning knowing she had 72 hours to produce $7,000. She had perhaps $3,000 remaining in her secret account. The rest would have to come from somewhere, and there was nowhere left to take it from. For 2 years, she had been bleeding money to Jonathan Creel. $5,000 in March of 1889, $5,000 in May, $3,000 in September, $7,000 due now, $20,000 total, extracted through carefully worded threats that never quite crossed into explicit extortion. $20,000 was more than most families earned in a decade. It was gone, funneled to a man whose face she had never seen, whose real name she didn't know. She sat at the writing desk in her bedroom, the morning sun casting patterns on the carpet, and tried to calculate a way forward. She could sell jewelry, but William tracked expensive pieces. She could forge his signature on bank documents, but that was a crime that could send her to prison, while she could confess everything and beg for mercy. The thought of confession made her physically ill. At 10:30 that morning, William's accountant, a meticulous man named Henry Pembroke, knocked on William's study door. He carried a leather folder containing household financial records for the past 24 months. He had been conducting a routine audit, the kind wealthy men performed annually to ensure staff weren't stealing. What he found instead was a pattern of withdrawals that made no sense. Mrs. Blount's charitable donations had increased dramatically in 1889. The claimed expenditures included $5,000 to the Society for Orphaned Children, $3,000 to the Hospital for Consumptives, $2,000 to the Fresh Air Fund, and multiple smaller donations totaling another $10,000 to $20,000 in charitable giving in 18 months. Pembroke had contacted the named organizations. The Society for Orphaned Children had received $500 from Mrs. Blount, not $5,000. The Hospital for Consumptives had received nothing. The Fresh Air Fund had received $200. The numbers were wrong by more than $15,000. William Blount listened to Pembroke's report with the cold focus of a man who had built a railroad empire by noticing when people were stealing from him. He asked 3 questions. Where was the money? Who had access to the accounts? What explanation had his wife given? Pembroke answered carefully. The money had been withdrawn in cash over 18 months. Mrs. Blount had access through her household allowance account. She had provided receipts, but the receipts did not match the organization's records. William dismissed Pembroke and sat alone in his study for 20 minutes. Then he sent for his wife. Mary entered the study at 11:15. She wore a morning dress of pale gray silk. Her hands were steady. She had been preparing for this moment since the first blackmail letter arrived. She had rehearsed explanations, crafted plausible lies, built a defense against discovery. All of it evaporated when she saw William's face. He did not ask where the money went. He asked a different question, one she had not anticipated. "Are you being blackmailed?" The question was so unexpected, so impossibly close to the truth, that Mary hesitated for 3 seconds too long. In those 3 seconds, William saw everything he needed to see. He asked the next question quietly. "Who is he?" Mary's world narrowed to the space between heartbeats. She could lie. She could claim there was no one, that the money went to gambling debts or secret drinking or any of the other vices wealthy women were supposed to hide. But William had been a negotiator for 30 years. He recognized a trapped opponent when he saw one. She told him about the apartment. She did not tell him about Arthur. She claimed she had rented the space for privacy, for time alone, and that someone had discovered it and was demanding payment for silence. It was a partial truth, the kind of lie that feels almost honest. William listened without interruption. When she finished, he asked for the blackmailer's letters. Mary claimed she had destroyed them. William asked for the address of the apartment. Mary gave it, and he dismissed her without another word. That evening, William sent investigators to 217 Fifth Avenue. They spoke with the superintendent, the doorman, the other tenants. By midnight, William knew about Arthur Dennison. He knew about Tuesdays and Thursdays. He knew the affair had lasted 2 years. By morning, he had filed preliminary divorce papers. 300 miles away in Philadelphia, Catherine Harrison was facing her own reckoning. Robert had not spoken to her since reading the newspaper article. He had locked himself in his study with his lawyers. Catherine remained in the Pittsburgh house, isolated, waiting. On April the 25th, Robert's lawyers delivered papers. He was filing for divorce on grounds of adultery and fraud. He was suing for full custody of their 2 legitimate children. He was demanding that Catherine vacate the house immediately. She would receive no financial support pending the divorce proceedings. Her access to all bank accounts was terminated. Catherine read the papers in the morning room, the same room where she had hosted tea parties for women who would never speak to her again. The lawyers stood by the door, waiting. She asked one question. What about Sarah and William? The answer was devastating. Because Sarah and William were born outside of legal marriage, they had no claim on Robert Harrison's estate. They were not his responsibility. Their custody would be determined by the court case Thomas Blake had filed. Catherine's right to them would depend on a judge's decision about an unmarried woman's fitness to raise illegitimate children. She had lost everything simultaneously: her marriage, her legitimate children, her home, her income, and potentially the 2 children she actually loved. The walls were not closing in. The walls had already closed. Both women were trapped in rooms that were growing smaller by the hour, the air running out, the exit sealed. Mary still had 72 hours to produce $7,000 she didn't have. Catherine still had to decide whether to fight for children the law said she had no right to keep. Both women understood, with crystalline clarity, that the double lives they had built so carefully were about to become public spectacles. The exposure they had paid everything to prevent was arriving anyway. The only question remaining was how brutal the destruction would be. Chapter 7. When silence became too expensive to buy. The New York Herald published its first story about Mary Adelaide Blount on June 14, 1890, destroying her life in 900 words. Jonathan Creel made the decision in late May. Mary had missed the April payment. She sent him a desperate letter, unsigned, pleading for more time. She claimed her husband was auditing the finances and she could not access funds. She promised to pay double within 2 months. Creel was a businessman. He understood leverage. A woman being investigated by her husband was a woman who could not pay, and a secret that could not generate revenue had only one remaining value: it could be sold. The tabloid newspapers paid for scandal. Not well, by Creel's standards. And the Herald offered him $300 for the full story about Mary Adelaide Blount, complete with documentation. $300 was a fraction of what he might have extracted from Mary over time. But Mary had no money left to extract. Creel took the deal. The article appeared on page 3 under the headline, "Society Wife's Secret Life Exposed." The byline belonged to a reporter named Charles Morrison, but the information came entirely from Creel's files. Morrison had simply arranged it into narrative form. The article was forensic in its detail. It named Mary Adelaide Blount by her full legal name. It identified her husband, William Blount, and specified his railroad holdings. It described the apartment at 217 Fifth Avenue, including the apartment number and the false name Mary used. It named Arthur Dennison and specified that he was a struggling artist of limited means. The article included testimony from the building superintendent about Mrs. Blount's regular visits. It quoted neighbors who had seen a well-dressed woman arriving every Tuesday and Thursday. It mentioned the blackmail payments without naming Creel, describing them only as payments to an unnamed individual who had discovered the affair. Most devastatingly, the article included the detail that William Blount had filed for divorce. This made the scandal legal record, not just gossip. Divorce proceedings were public. The article was not spreading rumors. It was reporting documented facts. Within 6 hours of publication, every drawing room in Manhattan was discussing Mary Adelaide Blount. The story had everything society scandals required: wealth, sex, a deception, and the fall of someone who had pretended to be better than she was. The fact that Mary was genuinely well-liked made the story more delicious, not less. The higher the pedestal, the more satisfying the fall. By evening, the other newspapers had picked up the story. The New York Times ran a shorter version on page 7. The Sun included editorial commentary about the moral decay of modern women. The Tribune interviewed a minister who used Mary as an example of what happened when wives abandoned Christian virtue. The story went into syndication. Papers in Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, and San Francisco reprinted it. Within a week, Mary Adelaide Blount was the most talked about scandal in America. The media attention operated according to its own logic, one that had nothing to do with truth or fairness. Reporters went to the apartment building and interviewed everyone. They tracked down Arthur Dennison, who refused to comment and locked himself in his studio. They interviewed society women who claimed they had always suspected something was wrong with Mrs. Blount. They published sketches of Mary based on old society photographs. The coverage grew more invasive as it continued. Papers published the divorce filing, which included William's allegations of adultery, fraud, and abandonment of wifely duties. They printed details about the blackmail payments, framing them as evidence of Mary's guilt. They speculated about how long the affair had lasted and whether there were other men. None of the articles interviewed Mary. She was not asked to defend herself or provide her perspective. She was the subject of the story, not a participant in it. The narrative was happening to her, not with her. On June 20th, 6 days after the first article, a photographer from the Herald waited outside the Blount mansion. When Mary left to visit her lawyer, he captured her image. The photograph ran the next day, Mary descending the front steps, her face turned away from the camera, one hand raised as if to block the lens. The caption read, "Mrs. Mary Adelaide Blount leaves her home, possibly for the last time." It was that photograph, more than any article, that sealed her fate. The image transformed her from a name in a scandal to a visible woman in disgrace. Readers could see her face, her clothes, her posture. They could judge her directly. And they did. Letters poured into the newspaper offices. Some condemned Mary as a harlot who had betrayed her husband. Others condemned William for his harshness. A few defended Mary, arguing that loveless marriages drove women to desperate acts. The newspapers printed selections from the letters, extending the scandal into participatory spectacle. Readers were not just consuming the story, they were becoming part of it. The scandal industry was extraordinarily profitable. The Herald sold an additional 15,000 copies the week the story broke. The increase in circulation translated to increased advertising revenue. Scandal, it turned out, was good business. Better than good. It was one of the most reliable revenue generators in publishing. This created perverse incentives. Newspapers did not just report scandals. They hunted for them. They cultivated sources like Jonathan Creel, who could provide documented secrets. They paid for information, and they rewarded exposure. Mary Adelaide Blount was not a person to the Herald. She was content. Her suffering sold papers. The more details they revealed, the more papers they sold. The more papers they sold, the more aggressively they pursued additional details. On June 28th, the Herald published a follow-up article with new information obtained from William Blount's lawyers. The article revealed that Mary would receive no alimony in the divorce settlement. She would lose custody of both children. She would be required to vacate the mansion within 30 days. The article included a quote from William's lawyer, describing Mary as an unfit mother who had abandoned her responsibilities. Mary had no lawyer present to contest the characterization. She had no platform to respond. The story was being written about her without her consent or participation. By July, the scandal had achieved a kind of cultural momentum that transcended Mary herself. She became a symbol. Preachers used her as an example in sermons about modern moral decline. Women's magazines published essays about the dangers of romantic fantasy. Society hostesses used her as a cautionary tale when advising their daughters. Mary Adelaide Blount, the actual human woman, disappeared into the symbol she had become. Her real motivations, her actual life, the complexity of her choices, none of it mattered. She was now a story people told to prove whatever point they wanted to make. And the story, as always, was more valuable than the truth. That's Chapter 8, The Trial That Destroyed Two Families. Catherine Harrison's secret emerged not in a newspaper, but in a Philadelphia courtroom, where her lover was suing for custody of the children. The trial began on July 7th, 1890. Thomas Blake versus Catherine Harrison. The legal question at stake: who had parental rights to Sarah Blake, age 4, and William Blake, age 2? The courtroom was packed. The scandal had been covered extensively in Philadelphia newspapers since May. Everyone knew the basic facts. Catherine Harrison, wife of steel magnate Robert Harrison, had maintained a second family with Thomas Blake for 5 years. The children at the center of the case were the product of that relationship. The trial was a spectacle from the first moment. Thomas's lawyer, a shrewd litigator named Daniel Frost, I understood that to win custody, he needed to prove 2 things. First, that Thomas was indeed the father. Second, that Catherine was unfit to raise the children. Frost began with paternity. He called witnesses who had seen Catherine and Thomas together in Philadelphia. The housekeeper from the Spruce Street house testified that Mrs. Blake, as she knew Catherine, lived there with Mr. Blake as husband and wife. The nurse testified that both children resembled Thomas. A doctor who had attended William's birth confirmed that Catherine had given birth at the Spruce Street house, and that Thomas Blake was listed as the father on the private birth record. Then Frost moved to destroy Catherine's character. He called Robert Harrison to the stand. Robert Harrison was 55 years old, gray-haired, prosperous, and coldly furious. He testified in a flat, controlled voice that cut through the courtroom like a blade. He described his marriage to Catherine. He explained that she had told him she was visiting her sick aunt in Philadelphia 1 week per month for 5 years. He stated that he had supported her financially throughout that time, providing her with an allowance of $2,000 annually. Frost asked him when he learned about the affair. Robert answered precisely, "May 18th, 1890, when I read about it in a newspaper." The courtroom stirred. Frost pressed further. "In the 5 years of your marriage, did you suspect your wife of infidelity?" Robert answered, "No." "Did she give you any reason to question her fidelity?" "No." "Did you know about the children Sarah and William Blake?" "Not until the newspaper article." Frost paused, in letting the testimony settle. Then he asked the question he had been building toward. "In your professional opinion as a businessman who employs 3,000 men, would you describe your wife as truthful?" Robert Harrison looked directly at Catherine across the courtroom. "No, I would describe her as an accomplished liar." Catherine's lawyer, a young attorney named William Morris, who was clearly overmatched, objected. The judge overruled. The answer stood. Frost called more witnesses. Catherine's aunt, Margaret Cunningham, the woman who had covered for her, took the stand. Under oath, she admitted she had lied to Robert Harrison multiple times about Catherine's whereabouts. She admitted she had been paid $200 a year for her cooperation. She wept while testifying, but the tears did not erase the facts. The housekeeper from Pittsburgh, Ellen Morris, testified that Mrs. Harrison had often seemed distracted and had received telegrams she destroyed immediately after reading. A carriage driver testified that he had once driven Mrs. Harrison to the train station when she claimed to be going shopping. The bank clerk who had processed Catherine's withdrawals testified about the amounts and frequency. Piece by piece, Frost constructed a portrait of Catherine Harrison as a woman who had systematically deceived everyone in her life for 5 years. A woman who had diverted her husband's money to support a secret household. A woman who had lied to servants, family, and society with such skill that no one suspected. Catherine's lawyer tried to argue that none of this was relevant to the custody question. The judge disagreed. Character, he ruled, was central to determining parental fitness. On the 3rd day of the trial, Frost called his final witness, Catherine herself. Catherine took the stand wearing a simple dark dress. She had lost weight during the 2 months since the scandal broke. Her face was drawn, her eyes shadowed. She swore to tell the truth. Frost began gently, asking her to describe her marriage to Robert Harrison. Catherine answered in a low voice that she had married him in 1884 at her father's insistence. She confirmed that she had not loved Robert. Then Frost asked about Thomas Blake. Catherine confirmed they had been engaged before her marriage. She confirmed they had resumed their relationship in 1885. She confirmed that Sarah and William were Thomas's biological children. Frost asked the devastating question, "Did you love your husband, Robert Harrison?" Catherine answered, "No." "Did you ever love him?" "No." "Did you intend to deceive him when you married him?" Catherine hesitated. "I intended to be a dutiful wife, but not a faithful one," Morris objected. The judge allowed the question. Catherine answered quietly, "I did not anticipate resuming my relationship with Mr. Blake." Frost shifted tactics. When did you realize you were pregnant with Sarah? September of 1885. Did you know the child was Mr. Blake's? Yes. Did you tell your husband? No. Why not? Catherine's voice broke slightly. Because he would have cast me out. I would have had nothing. Frost leaned in. So you chose to deceive him, maintain his household, spend his money, and bear another man's children while pretending fidelity? Morris objected strenuously. The judge sustained the objection, but the damage was done. The cross-examination continued for 2 hours. Frost methodically walked Catherine through every lie, every deception, every choice she had made. By the end, she was weeping openly on the stand. Morris's defense was weak. He argued that Catherine loved her children and had provided for them carefully. He pointed out that she had never neglected her duties as a mother. He suggested that Thomas Blake, as an unmarried man of limited means, could not provide the stability children needed. But the case was already lost. The narrative had been set. Catherine was an adulteress who had defrauded her husband, corrupted her household, and produced illegitimate children through deceit. The fact that she loved those children was irrelevant. On July 19th, the judge issued his ruling. He granted custody of Sarah and William to Thomas Blake, noting that while the father's circumstances were modest, the mother had proven herself morally unfit. Catherine was granted supervised visitation rights, 4 hours per month, subject to Thomas's approval. The ruling made national news. Papers across the country ran headlines about the steel magnate's wife who lost her secret children. The coverage was universally condemnatory of Catherine. Meanwhile, Robert Harrison filed his divorce on grounds of adultery. That case proceeded separately, and Pennsylvania law was clear. An adulterous wife received nothing in a divorce. Catherine would lose her 2 legitimate children as well. She would retain no property. She would receive no support. By August of 1890, Catherine Harrison had been systematically stripped of everything. Her marriages, her children, her home, her reputation, her income. She was 30 years old and owned nothing except the clothes she wore. The trial had not just destroyed her life. It had turned that destruction into entertainment. The newspapers printed daily transcripts. People followed the case like a serialized novel. Catherine's suffering was content, her humiliation a spectacle. She attended the final day of the divorce proceedings on August 12th. She sat alone in the courtroom while the judge dissolved her marriage and awarded full custody of her legitimate children to Robert. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stood. She spoke for less than a minute. She said, "I was 23 years old when I was married to a man I did not choose. I am not asking for sympathy. I am asking that someone acknowledge I had no choice." The judge responded, "You had the choice to honor your vows. You chose otherwise. This court is adjourned." Catherine walked out of the courtroom into a crowd of reporters and onlookers. Someone shouted a question about whether she regretted her actions. She did not answer. By evening, she had vanished from Philadelphia. No one knew where she went. Years later, there would be rumors of sightings, claims that she had moved west, speculation about whether she ever saw her children again. But the trial transcript remained. 247 pages of testimony documenting exactly how a woman's life could be dissected, judged, and discarded by a legal system that treated her desperation as a crime. Chapter 9: The Society That Devoured Its Daughters. By August of 1890, both women had been erased from every guest list, every club membership, every charity board that once competed for their presence. Social annihilation in the Gilded Age operated with mechanical precision. It required no trial, no formal accusation, no opportunity for defense. It simply happened, executed by women who had been friends days earlier. Mary Adelaide Blount learned about her erasure through silence. The calling cards stopped arriving. The invitations that once cluttered her morning table disappeared. When she sent her own cards to former friends, they were returned unopened. The message was clear. She no longer existed in society. The exclusion extended to everything. The Colony Club, where Mary had been a founding member, revoked her membership by letter. The board of the Society for Orphaned Children, which she had served on for 3 years, accepted her resignation that she had not offered. The charity committees, the art patronage groups, the cultural associations, every organization with which she had been involved sent polite notes explaining that her services were no longer required. The Women's Aid Society returned a donation she had sent, the check uncashed. The note explained that they could not accept funds from someone whose moral character was in question. Mary's name was struck from guest lists at venues across the city: Delmonico's, Sherry's, the Waldorf. Restaurant managers received instructions from regular patrons. If Mrs. Blount attempts to make a reservation, I inform her none are available. The instructions were unnecessary. Mary stopped trying. The most brutal exclusion was personal. Women she had known for years crossed the street to avoid her. Former friends who saw her in shops pretended not to recognize her. One woman, a close companion who had visited Mary's home dozens of times, said loudly in a crowded dressmaker's shop, "I don't speak to adulteresses." The social machinery of exclusion had rules, unwritten but universally understood. A woman who committed adultery became untouchable. It did not matter if her husband had been unfaithful first. It did not matter if the marriage had been loveless. It did not matter that half the women enforcing the exclusion knew their own marriages were equally empty. Now, the rules were clear. Women who stepped outside the boundaries of acceptable behavior were cast out completely. Men faced no such consequences. William Blount attended the same clubs, the same dinners, the same social events he always had. Some men offered condolences for his unfortunate marriage. Others made jokes about spirited wives. No one excluded him. In fact, his social standing arguably improved. He was now a victim, wronged by an unfaithful wife. Society rallied around him. The double standard was not subtle. It was not hidden. It was the explicit foundation of how scandal worked in Gilded Age America. Katherine Harrison faced the same erasure in Pittsburgh. The women's committees she had served on sent polite letters requesting her resignation. The church she had attended for 5 years asked her not to return. Families who had dined at her table wrote notes explaining that continued association was impossible given the circumstances. Robert Harrison faced no similar exclusion. He attended church the Sunday after the divorce was finalized. People shook his hand and expressed sympathy for what he had endured. Business continued exactly as before. His reputation was intact, even enhanced. He had dealt with an unfaithful wife decisively and maintained his dignity throughout. The logic was simple and devastating. Men who were betrayed were victims worthy of support. Women who stepped outside their prescribed roles were criminals worthy of exile. But the scandal of 1890 produced one additional case that revealed something even more disturbing about the boundaries society enforced. This was the case of Eleanor Perth, and her story demonstrated that women could be destroyed for deception that had nothing to do with sexual transgression. Eleanor Perth was 38 years old, married to a banker named Charles Perth. She had been publishing novels under the male pseudonym E.L. Weston since 1884. Her books were modestly successful, earning her approximately $500 per year. She published through a small press that knew her real identity, but maintained the fiction that E.L. Weston was a reclusive male author. Eleanor kept her writing secret from her husband. Not because the content was scandalous. Her novels were conventional romances, perfectly respectable. She kept it secret because Charles had made clear early in their marriage that he did not approve of wives who worked. He considered it embarrassing and a suggestion that he could not adequately provide for his household. In June of 1890, a literary magazine published a profile of E.L. Weston. An overzealous reporter investigated the author's identity and discovered Eleanor Perth. The magazine published the revelation as a charming human interest story. Popular novelist revealed to be society wife. Eleanor's husband read the article at breakfast. He was enraged, not by the fact that his wife wrote novels, by the fact that she had deceived him for 6 years. That evening, he demanded she cease publishing immediately and issue a public statement denying future work. Eleanor refused. Charles filed for divorce on grounds of deception and abandonment of wifely duties. The case was weaker than Robert Harrison's or William Blount's. There was no adultery, no scandal. But it did not matter. Eleanor had claimed an identity separate from her role as wife. That was transgression enough. The divorce proceeded. Eleanor lost. She retained no property and received minimal support. She continued publishing under her pseudonym, but sales declined sharply once readers knew E.L. Weston was a woman. By 1895, she was living in a boarding house, working as a seamstress. She died in 1898, impoverished and largely forgotten. Her case revealed the fundamental truth about Gilded Age society's treatment of women. It was not really about sex or morality. It was about control. Any woman who claimed autonomy, whether through a lover or a secret career or any form of independent identity, threatened the system, and the system responded by destroying her. The punishment was designed to be total: social exile, financial ruin, loss of children, public humiliation. The message was clear. This is what happens when you step outside the lines we have drawn for you. By September of 1890, Mary Adelaide Blount was living in a boarding house on 23rd Street. William had finalized the divorce in August. She received no settlement and no access to her children. Her son was 7. Her daughter was 4. She was not permitted to write to them. She had no income. The money was gone, bled away to blackmail and lawyers. She had no family willing to support her. Her father had died in 1888. Her mother refused to see her. She had no profession, no training, no way to earn a living beyond sewing or domestic work. Catherine Harrison's fate was even more desperate. She had disappeared from Philadelphia after the trial. Rumors placed her in Chicago, then Denver, then San Francisco. No one knew for certain. She had been erased so completely that even her location became speculative. Eleanor Perth continued her quiet decline in obscurity, noticed by no one except the landlady who wondered when the rent would be paid. 3 women who had made different choices for different reasons, destroyed by the same machinery. One had sought love. One had sought family. One had sought creative expression. All 3 had committed the same fundamental crime. They had wanted something for themselves. Society had rendered its verdict. Wanting was not permitted, and the sentence, as always, was erasure. Chapter 10. After the fall, the disappearance. Mary Adelaide Blount vanished from New York society in 1891 and resurfaced 3 years later in San Francisco under a name nobody recognized. The years between 1890 and 1893 remain largely undocumented. Mary left no letters, kept no diary, gave no interviews. What is known comes from fragmentary records, boarding house registries, occasional mentions in public documents, secondhand accounts from people who claim to have seen her. She lived in the boarding house on 23rd Street for 7 months. The landlady later told a reporter that Mrs. Blount, as she still called herself, kept to her room most days. She had no visitors. She received no mail. She paid her rent on time for the first 4 months, then began falling behind. In March of 1891, Mary took work as a seamstress at a shop on 6th Avenue. The work paid $8 a week. She sewed buttonholes, hemmed skirts, repaired torn seams. The other seamstresses did not know who she was. She did not tell them. The shop owner, a woman named Mrs. Kowalski, kept her employed for 5 months. Then a customer recognized Mary from the scandal. The customer complained. Mrs. Kowalski, fearing other customers would object to being served by a notorious adulteress, let Mary go. Mary found other work. A laundry on 9th Street hired her to fold linens. She lasted 6 weeks before being recognized again. A factory that made shirtwaists employed her for a month. The pattern repeated. She would find work, be recognized, be dismissed. By autumn of 1891, she had left New York. Our records show a Mary Blount registered at a boarding house in Philadelphia in October, employed as a domestic servant. Whether this was the same woman is uncertain. If it was, she did not stay long. In 1892, a woman matching Mary's description was living in Chicago, working in a department store. A newspaper reporter, following up on the scandal, claimed to have found her. The woman denied being Mary Adelaide Blount. The reporter published the story anyway, complete with speculation about her current circumstances. Whether the woman was actually Mary remains unknown. But the article demonstrates something important. Even in anonymity, even in poverty, Mary could not escape the scandal. It followed her across cities and years, a permanent mark that no amount of distance could erase. The first confirmed sighting comes from San Francisco in 1894. City directories list a Mary A. Walker, seamstress, living at a boarding house on Folsom Street. The name matched the pattern of women changing their identities, keeping initials, choosing common surnames. A woman who lived in the same boarding house later claimed that Mary Walker was indeed the former Mrs. Blount. She described Mary as quiet, solitary, and skilled with a needle. Mary worked from home, taking in alterations and custom sewing. She charged less than other seamstresses to build a client base. She lived in one room. She owned almost nothing: a narrow bed, a sewing table, a trunk containing her clothes and supplies. No photographs, no jewelry, no mementos of her former life. She had shed everything except the skills that kept her alive. According to the boarding house neighbor, Mary never spoke about her past. She never mentioned New York, her marriage, or her children. When asked about her family, she said simply that she had none. The neighbor also reported something heartbreaking. Mary received letters periodically, which she read once and then burned. The neighbor suspected they were from her children, though Mary never confirmed this. If her children did write, if they somehow found her despite the distance and years, Mary never responded. Catherine Harrison's trajectory was darker. After the Philadelphia trial, she vanished completely for 2 years. The first documented appearance comes from Denver in 1892, where a woman calling herself Catherine Blake was arrested for laudanum possession. The police report describes a woman in her early 30s, well-spoken despite evident intoxication, who claimed to be a widow. She was released after paying a fine. The arresting officer noted that she seemed educated but destitute. Whether this was Catherine Harrison is uncertain, but the details align: the age, the manner, the choice of Blake as a surname, and the laudanum suggests what the scandal had done to her. Laudanum addiction was common among women in the Gilded Age. It was legal, sold in pharmacies as medicine for everything from headaches to nerves. It was also devastatingly addictive. Women who had lost everything often found temporary escape in the opium-based tincture. If the Denver arrest was Catherine, she disappeared again after that. Some reports placed her in mining towns in Montana. In others claimed she had returned east, living under various names. One persistent rumor suggested she had died in 1894 in a charity hospital in St. Louis, though no death certificate was ever found. What is certain is that Catherine never regained custody of any of her children. The legitimate children remained with Robert Harrison, who remarried in 1893. Sarah and William Blake were raised by Thomas Blake until his death in 1896, at which point they were placed with Thomas's sister. Whether Catherine ever saw her children again is unknown. No records document any contact. It is possible she watched them from a distance. Possible she tried to reach them and was refused. Possible she was too broken by laudanum and poverty to try. The historical record is silent. Eleanor Perth's final years are better documented, though no less tragic. She continued writing after her divorce, but published infrequently. Sales of E.L. Weston novels declined sharply once readers knew the author was a woman. Publishers lost interest. Eleanor took work as a copyist, transcribing legal documents for law firms. The work paid poorly, but was steady. She lived in a series of boarding houses, moving when rent increased beyond what she could afford. She had no family support. Her former husband remarried and refused all contact. In 1897, Eleanor published her final novel, a bitter story about a woman destroyed by society for claiming an independent identity. It sold fewer than 200 copies. Eleanor Perth died in March of 1898, at age 46, in a boarding house on the Lower East Side. The cause of death was listed as pneumonia, but the landlady noted that Eleanor had been ill for months and could not afford a doctor. She died alone. The boarding house owner paid for a pauper's burial. Her obituary in the New York Times was 3 sentences long. It identified her as E. L. Weston, author of minor romantic novels. It did not mention her marriage, her divorce, or the fact that she had been destroyed for writing under a pseudonym. Her work was forgotten within a decade. 3 women, 3 different paths to the same destination: poverty, isolation, erasure. They had wanted autonomy in an era that criminalized women's independence. They had built secret lives because legitimate autonomy was forbidden. And when those secret lives were exposed, society did not punish them for the deception. It punished them for the wanting. What happened after the fall was not redemption or second chances. It was slow obliteration. These women did not rebuild their lives. They survived on the margins, invisible and forgotten, until even survival became impossible. Chapter 11. The Blackmailer's Reward and the System's Indifference. Jonathan Creel faced no criminal charges for destroying Mary Adelaide Blount, because in 1890, America, blackmail was difficult to prosecute, and profitable secrets were everywhere. Creel continued his operations for 8 more years after Mary's scandal. The exposure of her affair, far from damaging his business, actually enhanced it. Other potential victims saw what happened when someone stopped paying, and the lesson was clear. Creel delivered on his threats. Between 1890 and 1898, Creel blackmailed at least 17 additional women, by conservative estimates based on fragmentary court records and newspaper accounts. The actual number was likely higher. Most blackmail victims never reported the crime. Reporting meant revealing the secret publicly, which defeated the entire purpose of paying for silence. The women Creel targeted followed a pattern: wealthy, married, socially prominent, with secrets that would destroy their lives if revealed. Some were having affairs. Others were concealing financial improprieties, gambling debts, hidden children, relationships with other women, or simply activities their husbands would consider scandalous. Creel's operation grew more sophisticated over time. He employed a staff of 6 investigators by 1893. He maintained detailed files on over 100 potential targets, waiting for the right moment to approach them. He cultivated relationships with newspaper reporters, offering them stories in exchange for information. He invested his blackmail profits in legitimate businesses, rental properties, stocks, a small printing company. By 1896, Creel was wealthy. He owned a townhouse on Gramercy Park. He invested in real estate across Manhattan. He donated to charities, attended cultural events, presented himself as a successful businessman. No one questioned where his money came from. Success in Gilded Age New York was its own credential. The legal system was nearly powerless to stop him. Blackmail was a crime under New York law, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. But prosecution required evidence, and evidence required victims willing to testify. Most victims would rather pay than testify, because testifying meant revealing the secret in open court. The few blackmail cases that went to trial usually ended in acquittal. Defense attorneys argued that the money was a gift or a loan. They claimed the letters were misunderstood. They destroyed victims on cross-examination, exposing the very secrets the victims had paid to conceal. Juries, composed entirely of men, often sympathized with the blackmailer over the adulterous wife. Creel finally faced prosecution in 1898, but not for blackmailing women. He was arrested for attempting to extort a city alderman who had taken bribes from a construction company. The alderman, or unlike Creel's usual victims, had political power and protection. He reported the blackmail attempt. Creel was arrested, tried, and convicted. The trial revealed the extent of Creel's operations. Police found his ledgers, coded but decipherable, documenting years of extortion. They found files on dozens of victims. They found letters, photographs, financial records. But no women came forward to testify. Not one. The scandal would have destroyed them more thoroughly than it would have hurt Creel. So, the prosecution relied on the alderman's testimony alone. Creel was convicted of a single count of attempted extortion and sentenced to 3 years in prison. He served 18 months. Upon release in 1900, he moved to Philadelphia and resumed blackmail operations under a different name. He was never prosecuted again. He died in 1912, moderately wealthy, his crimes largely unpunished. The newspapers that had profited from scandals like Mary's also faced no consequences. The Herald, the Sun, the Tribune, all had built circulation by exposing private lives. The practice was not illegal. It was journalism. In fact, scandal journalism became more profitable and more aggressive in the 1890s. Papers competed to expose society figures. They hired investigators to uncover secrets. They paid sources for information. The line between journalism and extortion blurred. William Randolph Hearst, who purchased the New York Journal in 1895, pioneered aggressive scandal coverage. He instructed his reporters to find stories that would shock readers. Circulation soared. Other papers followed his lead. By 1900, a scandal was a permanent feature of American journalism. The system was not designed to protect women like Mary Adelaide Blount. It was designed to exploit them. Blackmailers created the scandals. Newspapers profited from publishing them. Lawyers earned fees managing the divorces. Society enjoyed the spectacle of watching someone fall. The double standard remained firmly in place. Men who committed adultery faced social inconvenience at worst. Men who visited prostitutes, kept mistresses, or fathered illegitimate children were considered rakish or unfortunate, but not ruined. Theodore Roosevelt, who would become president in 1901, had numerous affairs during his first marriage. It was well known in political circles. It never threatened his career. Women, meanwhile, were destroyed for far less. An affair meant divorce, a poverty, loss of children, social exile. A secret career meant the same. Any claim to autonomy, any attempt to live outside the prescribed boundaries carried the same penalty. The legal system reinforced this. Divorce laws heavily favored men. Custody laws assumed mothers were unfit if they had committed adultery. Property laws gave wives no claim to marital assets. A woman who left or was cast out of her marriage left with nothing. The system was not broken. It was functioning exactly as designed. It was built to control women by making the cost of independence total and unavoidable. What happened to men like Jonathan Creel or publishers like The Herald was nothing. What happened to women like Mary, Catherine, and Eleanor was annihilation. The asymmetry was not an accident. It was the point. By 1900, the Gilded Age was ending. Progressive reforms would eventually change some laws. Women would win the vote in 1920. Divorce would become slightly more accessible. But the fundamental machinery of scandal and punishment would persist for decades. The lesson of 1890 was clear to anyone paying attention. A woman who wanted something for herself paid for it with everything, and the men who profited from her destruction paid for it with nothing at all. Chapter 12. The price of wanting more than you were given. They didn't want to overthrow society or rewrite marriage. They just wanted to choose something for themselves, and that small desire cost them everything. Mary Adelaide Blount was not a revolutionary. She was a woman who wanted to breathe in her own life. She did not challenge the institution of marriage or advocate for women's rights or publish manifestos demanding change. She simply rented an apartment and spent Tuesday and Thursday afternoons with a man who made her feel real. Catherine Harrison was not trying to destroy the family structure. She wanted to be with the person she loved and raise children with him. The fact that this required maintaining two households and deceiving everyone she knew was not ideological. It was logistical. Society offered her no legal path to choose her own life, so she built an illegal one. Eleanor Perth wanted to write novels. That was the entirety of her transgression. She wrote conventional romantic fiction under a male name and kept the income secret from her husband. She was not advocating for women's suffrage or challenging gender roles. She just wanted to create something that belonged to her. None of these women were trying to change the world. They were trying to survive in it, and the world destroyed them anyway. The tragedy is not that they failed. The tragedy is that success was never possible. The system they navigated was designed to make any form of female autonomy impossible. The rules were explicit. Wives belonged to their husbands. Their bodies, their labor, their children, their very identities were property. A woman who tried to reclaim any piece of herself was committing theft. The double lives were not acts of rebellion. They were acts of desperate negotiation with an impossible reality. If you cannot leave your marriage, you create a space outside it. If you cannot own your work, you publish under a false name. If you cannot choose your life, you choose secret hours within it. What makes these stories particularly devastating is how ordinary the desires were. Mary wanted affection and intellectual companionship. Catherine wanted to be with the man she loved and raise their children. Eleanor wanted to write. These are not radical demands, they are basic human needs. But in the Gilded Age, basic human needs were only rights when men expressed them. When women expressed them, they became crimes. The machinery of punishment was extraordinarily efficient. Blackmailers extracted money, newspapers extracted scandal, lawyers extracted fees, society extracted entertainment. The destruction of a woman's life generated profit at every stage. And then she was erased, removed from memory, disappeared into poverty or addiction or death. The question that haunts these stories is not why these women built double lives. The question is how many other women did the same and were never caught. For every Mary Adelaide Blount exposed in a newspaper, how many women maintained their secret successfully? For every Catherine Harrison destroyed in a courtroom, how many navigated their deceptions for decades without discovery? The historical record only captures the failures. The successes, by definition, remained hidden. There must have been women who managed to maintain secret lives until death. Women whose lovers never demanded recognition. Women whose blackmailers were satisfied with the payments. Women who were simply luckier or more careful. We will never know their names. We will never read their stories. They survived by remaining invisible, and visibility would have destroyed them. The only women whose names survived were the ones who failed to stay hidden. This creates a profound historical silence. We know about the women who were caught, but they represent only the visible failures of a much larger phenomenon. The true scale of women's resistance to the constraints of Gilded Age marriage is unknowable. It exists in burned letters and untold stories, and secrets women carried to their graves. What we do know is this. The women who were exposed paid a price so devastating that it was designed to terrify others into compliance. The punishment was meant to be exemplary. Mary, Catherine, and Eleanor were not just victims. They were warnings. But their destruction was a message to every other woman who considered stepping outside the boundaries. This is what happens when you want something for yourself. And the message worked. Society maintained its control through spectacle. Every scandal reinforced the rules. Every ruined woman demonstrated the cost of disobedience. The system perpetuated itself through fear. But it also perpetuated itself through silence. The women who succeeded in maintaining double lives never spoke about them. The women who were destroyed were erased too thoroughly to tell their own stories. What remains is fragments, court transcripts, newspaper articles, boarding house registries. The women themselves, their thoughts and feelings and desperate calculations, are mostly lost. Mary Adelaide Blount died in San Francisco in 1908 at age 45. The death certificate lists her as Mary Walker, seamstress. There is no mention of her former identity, her marriage, her children, her scandal. She was buried in a pauper's grave. No one attended the funeral. Catherine Harrison's death is not documented. She may have died in the 1890s or lived into the 20th century under another name. We do not know. What we know is that she lost everything in 1890 and was never heard from again. Eleanor Perth died in 1898 and was quickly forgotten. Her novels are out of print. Her name appears in no literary histories. She is a footnote, if that. 3 women who wanted small pieces of autonomy. 3 women who paid total prices. 3 women whose stories we remember only because their destruction was public enough to leave traces in the historical record. The Gilded Age ended. Laws changed slowly. Women won some rights, then more rights, then something approaching equality, though the work is never finished. The specific machinery that destroyed Mary, Catherine, and Eleanor no longer exists in quite the same form. But the fundamental dynamic persists. Society still punishes women for wanting things outside prescribed boundaries. The methods are different. The consequences are less total. But the message remains: wanting too much, claiming too much, being too much, all carry prices that men do not pay. These women's lives pose a question that every generation must answer. What do we do with people who want more than they were given? Do we expand what is given, or do we punish the wanting? The Gilded Age chose punishment. It chose spectacle. It chose to turn women's desperation into profit and their destruction into entertainment. We remember them now not because they succeeded, but because they tried. They built impossible double lives in the small spaces society left unguarded. They claimed hours and rooms and identities that were supposed to belong to their husbands. They risked everything for the chance to choose something, anything, for themselves. They lost. But the fact that they tried at all, knowing the stakes, understanding the cost, reveals something essential about the human need for autonomy. You can make the price of wanting total. You can make the punishment devastating. But you cannot eliminate the wanting itself. As long as people are denied the right to choose their own lives, some of them will build secret lives anyway. Some will succeed. Some will fail. All will pay prices. The question is not whether people will want what they are not given. The question is whether we will build a world where wanting is permitted, or whether we will continue to destroy people for the crime of being human. Mary Adelaide Blount wanted to feel real for 3 hours twice a week. That wanting cost her marriage, her children, her wealth, her name, and ultimately her life. She died alone in a rented room, buried under a false name, forgotten. Was the wanting worth the cost? We cannot ask her, but we can ask ourselves, what kind of world makes that the choice?